I think we've seen enough, and we're not seeing the things that you were fearful about, and it's time for us to now update them to make sense for these businesses to survive and operate.
I've built and sold companies for millions. With 25 years in tech and now in cannabis, I know what it takes to scale, adapt, and survive in tough, over-regulated markets. If you're trying to build something that lasts, you are in the right place, because today's guest is Ryan Dominguez, Executive Director of the Massachusetts Cannabis Coalition, and one of the people behind the scenes helping shape the laws that run our industry. We talk about how bills are actually getting passed, why license caps should be raised, and what new rules around advertising, employee badging, and Florida's law mean for operators.
If we want our brands to be able to be successful, why wouldn't we want them to grow within Massachusetts and be able to, be sustainable, make a name for itself, and then be able to expand?
This is the Inside Scoop. This is Advocacy in Action.
I'm Ryan Dominguez. I'm the Executive Director for the Massachusetts Cannabis Coalition. That's a trade association with over 80 licensees represented. And basically, we do a lot of policy and regulatory work. And what that means is basically we get a group of operators together. We talk about all of the issues, many issues all the time. And then from there, we sit down and have hard conversations about what the solutions are. And I think for the most part, we agree on what the issues are. I think we differ sometimes on what those solutions are. But together, we're able to come and put together the language for the policies, language for regulation changes, and then a plan for advocacy on how we're going to testify on behalf of some of the solutions we're pushing, and then also how we're going to get it out to the rest of the masses.
Yeah, so testify, that's actually something, a lot of testimony just came out the other day.
Yeah.
That was obviously a very long meeting. But before we go diving into kind of that, why can't the CCC just make all these changes?
Yeah. So there's a difference between the legislation that is written into statute versus the regulations that are promulgated by the CCC.
Yeah, see, a lot of these things are like big words, like promulgated.
Yeah.
I can't even pronounce that word, promulgated. But I think what's important to know for the audience especially is that you need to be paying attention to these things. If you're a licensed operator, you need to be listening to what Ryan and MCC are talking about, because as one of the leading trade groups in Massachusetts, trade associations, trade groups,
same thing.
There's a lot of action that's happening, and you have to at least be listening and paying attention, because I still don't know the difference between what the CCC has kind of a purview for and what they can actually implement versus what the legislature has to actually change in law.
Yeah, exactly. So, back in 2016, the voters voted to make adult use cannabis legalized here in Massachusetts. And then it was on the legislature. So you're talking about your state senators as well as your state representatives in your city and town. They were tasked with creating the law around cannabis and what it was going to look like in Massachusetts. And so they put out what their intent was for the law and what they thought the structure should be, and then they create a regulatory agency, which is the CCC, and the CCC is tasked with implementing that. So like more of the kind of day-to-day details of how you operate.
That's why there's investigators and stuff like that, because they're in charge of the implementation of it. They're not necessarily in charge of making up the laws for it.
Exactly. And the CCC, they have some power to, kind of read what the law was from the state legislature and then figure out, okay, this is what they intended for the legislature to do, and that's how they craft their regulations. And so the CCC is tasked with everything from doing the investigations to the licensing, focused on like testing as well as research and data. And so you see all of these main functions that the CCC has, but because of the law that the state legislators made, there are certain changes that they can't make or implement, and that's why we sometimes have to go back to the state house and try to get them to change the law.
And so there's senators and representatives, and that's why people are always like, hey, contact your senators, contact your representatives, because your voice is important. And it's like one of those things where if you're going out and you're writing emails or showing up at their desk or calling, not stalking them, but like trying to get a hold of these people to be like, hey, here's what your constituents, I'm in your district.
Yeah.
Here's what I think should change. And those are the voices that they pay attention to, right? Because if you're just silent, you're not changing anything.
Yeah, 100%. And I think your state legislators, because you're a business within their district, they don't want their businesses in their district to fail.
Right.
And so, and they're really understanding of the process that you had to go through to get that license and open up. Everything with cannabis, like even whether you like politics or not, is politics. You've had to go through a local process to get your host community agreement. Probably had to go to a zoning board of appeals and all of that. So you've been going through a whole process of being political. And so I think, it's really important for the industry to still like take that even after they open their doors, because there's a lot of changes that are happening that will affect your business and your business model, how you're going to be able to potentially scale up your business, or the things that may affect you in terms of like saving costs with your just normal day-to-day processes and standard operating procedures. So all of that is based in policy. And so I think that's why monitoring what's going on at the state house, obviously watching some of the CCC meetings, like trying to keep up to date with the bulletins. If you're not doing that, you can have an investigator maybe show up to your door one day, and then you'll find out that you haven't been following a certain regulation and get docked with a NOD for it. And I think those are things that, all businesses just kind of have to, figure out. I know not every business has a compliance team or has the resources to have so. So like, I think sometimes it's empowering, like, the staff that you do have to follow some of these, or, getting kind of read up on it as a founder yourself.
This episode is brought to you by Good Feels, makers of Good Vibes, the fast-acting tincture that actually delivers. Whether you're into classic flavors like grape, blue raz, or strawberry, or want to try our brand new 1,000 milligram mango guava, we've got a vibe for every taste. Just pop it into your drink and feel it kick in fast. None of the wait, all the feels. Available now in 500 milligrams or 1,000 milligrams bottles across Massachusetts dispensaries or at getgoodfeels.com. As always, 21 plus only, and please consume responsibly. Yeah, I am the compliance person.
Yeah.
We're tiny, right? We're 11, 12 people full time, right?
Exactly.
And so we're still very much a tiny company in this, this $1.6 billion annual industry. We are tiny compared to obviously the big players here. So we definitely still recognize that we're an underdog and we're trying to be scrappy as we can. And so I act as the compliance person. And so anytime there is one of these bulletins, memos that get sent out, I'm promulgating. That's that word. I'm sending it to their team.
And
I'm basically gonna be like, how does this affect us? You know what I mean? Like, I'll interpret it my way, but I also send it to my production director often and be like, new testing results or new testing stuff has to happen. They were just talking, I guess, the other day about, being able to start, anything that's been remediated, adding something that says is remediated to like some kind of, almost kind of like, has it been lab tested? Of course, we have to say that, and we also have to have a little symbol for it.
Yeah.
There might be a new remediation symbol or something like that that's being like, hey, this has been remediated, right? So a lot of these things.
So a few quick things just to add on to that. The reason why you have a trade association and like the power behind it is for, businesses that don't have a compliance person or somebody that is a government affairs person and tracking the legislation or regulations, is you can be part of this group and get updates about what's happening in real time. And then also if it's something that's affecting you, you can share your story about how it's affecting you. And I'm able to then disseminate some of that information back to our state legislators and the regulators. And I think it's just a really great way for us to share information that's coming down, because you may, get docked with the NOD, somebody else may not, and then trying to figure out, can we build some consistency here, or figure out, did you deserve to get that NOD?
Right, exactly.
And so I think those are huge things. And I think sometimes the challenge, and we're going to see this with the CCC remediation thing, is that it's up in the air about like, what they can versus what they can't do through kind of a regulatory process. And so the remediation thing is something we'll be looking into a lot more.
That's all brand new, right?
Yeah,
so it's changing. And I think a lot of people who are outside of the industry who may be listening to the podcast don't realize how much things change. And so we're always having to adapt to like almost a new world. Every year it's just like, okay, now here's the new kind of operating world that we live in. And NOD, for those who don't understand, is notice of deficiency. Basically when an investigator comes in, surprise, you're like, hey, we're here. and they put their gloves on and they're running through the facility, rummaging through all your files and documents and stuff like that. If they find something that's insufficient or something that's basically against one of the regulations, they'll give you an NOD, a notice of deficiency, that will literally say, like, you have to make these changes, and then you have to respond, within a certain amount of time, 24 hours for certain things, up to 10 days for certain things. Basically saying, like, hey, we've done the fix at this point, right? And here's what we did, and then you have to have a memo back to them. So I remember, and this is something that I brought up with the executive director, Travis Ahern, when we actually had our podcast, which was, you mentioned 2016. Back when I first entered this industry, and I started looking in 2019-ish, and I finally incorporated 2020, I always heard this idea of, like, it was started by a bunch of, prohibitionists, people who don't want the plant, but the voters voted, and we actually ended up passing it, so we had to kind of suck it up, and this is just what we have, and because they kind of made the rules. How much has that changed? Do you see, like, the senators and representatives maybe having a more favorable outlook on this industry at this point, or like they're not as prohibitionist as they were potentially back in 2016?
It's funny because there's still a lot of reps and senators who are prohibitionists and were against the legalization for adult use, and there's even still people who do not believe in the medical benefits of cannabis itself. So even with that, I think that the state has benefited a lot from the cannabis industry. We always hear about the billions of dollars in sales. Another piece of that is all of the tax revenue that we're generating for the state, all of the funding that is going to schools and really great programs and whatever it may be. And I think you as a business owner are also required to, give community benefits and hire people from disproportionately impacted communities and that kind of thing. So outside of, maybe the stigma of cannabis, I think that the legislators see all of the benefits that are happening. And after so many years of being legalized, there just hasn't been a big public health crisis. There hasn't been a huge crime spree or anything like that. Exactly. And so I think
I keep on saying the sky hasn't fallen.
The sky hasn't fallen. Exactly. And I think they're starting to see us more as just normal businesses, normal retailers, normal product manufacturers, and, farmers. And so I think that's the part that I'm trying to make to folks is we should be treated like those other industries as well.
Yeah, I think that actually came up during some of the testimony around advertising regulations. Be like, why can't we advertise like a normal business, right?
Exactly.
Before we get too deep into that, though, so I know you're not going to name any names, but there are some people in the Senate and in the House that are just they've been against it, and they don't necessarily they're not changing their tune anytime soon.
Exactly.
Totally. So you mentioned a few things that are quite interesting. So the tax revenue is interesting because I think about all the different policy or all the different bills that were proposed during that. And I do know that obviously there's a very large tax benefit. And this is one of the things I clarified that with Executive Director Travis Ahern actually clarified. Executive Director of the CCC. He clarified on the pod. He basically says all that tax revenue goes to the state and then they have to request a budget. So they don't actually CCC does not get any of the tax revenue directly. They have to go to the state and be like, hey, we need, $70 million to run this year. And they get approved or they don't get approved for it, and there's adjustments or whatever. But they don't all of a sudden, they're not flush with cash. They actually have to go back to the state and request these things, which is why I think one of the biggest things, Executive Director Travis Ahern actually did mention that he's like, I want an audit internally. He was kind of like, just give us the funding to hire that auditor and we can go do the audit internally. He's very much kind of in that vein of almost that transparency, be like, audit us. Let's get to the bottom of this, try to figure out there's these inefficiencies and stuff like that, because he's really about efficiency. And so I thought that was really interesting coming from the executive director, basically saying I don't mind an audit. You just have to give us the budget for it though. If you don't give us any funding for it, we can't do our jobs. Anyway, but I do think about tax revenue sometimes, and I'm thinking to myself, the de-verticalization. So that was one of the topics. There was 5 big topics that were kind of, if you want to group them. The de-verticalization of the medical market is something that I've definitely been behind for a long time, because based on when we started back in 2020, I started thinking about all these things. I remember when we first came out with our products, an oncologist friend came to me and said, I just wish you had stronger drinks, because we were a 5 milligram drink. I wish we could have stronger drinks for my cancer patients. And so we came up with the beverage enhancer. So it was a little bit stronger. Obviously, you can go up to 100 mgs. But the point is, like, I was like, if it was deverticalized back then, I probably would have a medical product manufacturing license right now. Right. So the issue is deverticalization. So right now, if you want to be a medical operator, not the adult use side, recreational as it's called, if you want to be a medical operator, you literally have to spend $50,000 a year in fees and licensing fees per license type. And you have to hold a minimum of those 3 license types, which is cultivation, product manufacturing, and retail.
Exactly.
Right? That's because it's vertical, right?
Exactly.
Back when it first started, what was it, 2012 or something like that, the medical program?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So back when it first started, I was DPH days, Department of Public Health. Exactly. And then it was obviously sky was going to fall, like, everybody was scared, like the children.
Exactly.
And even for medical back in 2012. And so they were like, well, we have to know where all the whole full chain of command, right? Or the full traceability of the product. And so everybody has to be vertical, right?
Yep.
It's been over a decade now, and it's still vertical. And we're losing tons and tons of medical stores. Tons of medical license holders are not renewing, not tons, but the few that are there sometimes aren't renewing because it's not worth the money. $50,000 for every license type moving forward every year. So I think about that sometimes, because one of the people who have medical cards are always just like, well, you don't have to pay tax if you're medical, right?
Yeah.
Because it's medicine. You don't pay tax on medicine. So therefore you're able to go to a dispensary, a medical dispensary, purchase your product tax-free. And I think to myself, has there ever been somebody who stood up and basically said, like, well, we want that tax revenue, that's why we're not going to deverticalize? Because Frank Shaw and Jeremiah McKinnon have been talking, and I've been supporting them for such a long time in the medical. It's been years they've been talking about these things.
Yeah.
And nothing has changed. Like, why hasn't something as simple as deverticalization occurred yet?
Yeah, and I think part of that has been kind of a debate on whether this can be done through the regulations at the CCC versus having to go back to the legislature to do this.
Who's actual who changes this to
Exactly.
Whose authority is this?
And so there's varying opinions on that. I think that from our perspective that it can, some of that can be done through the CCC. I think the challenges with working with the legislature, on the other hand, is they're only going to pick up things like every so often. I mean, the last time we had a cannabis-related bill was back in 2022, I believe, when we had the host community agreements, the social equity trust fund. So it's not every year that the legislature is going to see cannabis as a priority. And it makes a lot of sense. They're, not just focused on cannabis. They're focused on many other issues. And they have 200 people that you have to convince. And so the CCC...
Is that how big the Senate and House is combined?
Yeah, combined, yes.
200. Wow.
200. So there's about 40 senators and 160 House of Representatives. And so the CCC is supposed to be a little bit more nimble, and they only have 5 commissioners. They have an executive director. I think some of the challenges that they've had in terms of turnover with leadership and that kind of thing maybe contributes to it. But with the vertical integration process, I do think that we're going back to the legislature to see if they might be able to assist us with that. And I think some of the other things we pushed, and I know we'll get into them a little bit more, but like agent registration cards, advertising, these are all things that potentially, depending on who you talk to,
it's almost
can
like
get done through
they're
CCC.
like 2 different children, and you're the parent, and you're basically be like, well, who did this, and who can change this, or who can fix this? Yeah. And you're like, I can't, and I can't, and it's like they're just basically being like, they're passing the buck back to each other. Be like, the CCC throws their hands up, and they're like, we can't change anything, and then everybody's like, all right, let's focus on the senators and representatives and get a bill passed. And then the bill, I've heard this before. Like, they're like, well, the CCC has control over this, right? So like the HCA stuff that happened.
Yeah.
It was just like, well, they have control over this, right? So I was like, who's the parent involved? Is it basically a judge that's going to have to figure this out? Be like, you're the one, and but anyway, so let's get into some of the specific things. So actually, before that, let's talk about the process of actually getting a bill passed.
Yeah, of course.
I don't remember my my
civics 101.
Yeah, so this is going to be, I'm definitely rusty on this stuff.
No, it's okay.
But I think that we just had public testimony.
Yep.
These bills have been kind of stewing for a little bit and evolving and then submitted. And then you had to have a sponsor. Is that how it works? So you got a sponsor. So some senators and representatives will sponsor specific things.
Exactly.
Representatives will obviously sponsor the House bills. Senators will sponsor the Senate bills.
Exactly.
And actually talk about that a little bit. So like, if it's already in the Senate, is it like the House already passed it? Or is it now it has to like go across? So if the senators already said, hey, we're going to go do this, and then it has to go to the House kind of thing?
So they have their own independent processes. And so just to kind of back it all the way up. So a session for Massachusetts goes for about a year and a half. And we're at the beginning stage of the session. So in January, all of the legislators have to file a bill in the House or the Senate. So sometimes you'll have a House member and a Senate member file like the same language, the same bill.
We're going to get to that.
And the reason why they do that is because they have their own separate processes in terms of developing that bill, getting that bill to the floor, and then voting on that bill. Because each of the bills has to be voted on within that specific House or Senate. And so what ends up happening is we had a hearing on that bill, and then the House and the Senate will take their bills. So the Senate bills and the House bills will go into both of their kind of committees. And then what will happen is they'll either redraft it or they'll report these bills out to like the next stages of the process. And so,
like report like favorably.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, they'd be like, hey, we think we would pass something like where we all agree.
Exactly. So we would recommend that this bill move forward in a positive fashion. So like into the next step of the process, which is usually the Ways and Means Committee. That's where it's kind of like the waiting room for all of the bills to then make it to the floor for an actual vote.
That's what that is.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so the Ways and Means Committee like handles all of the bills and that as like the next stage, or they also handle the budget. So some of these bills we're going to require some state funding, and that's why they kind of connected to. Sometimes bills are not reported out favorably, and they're reported to kind of get studied some more. So you'll hear things like reported to study, and so that means that the legislature needs to kind of
It wasn't ready.
They need to look at it some more, understand maybe kind of the third and fourth implications of passing that. And so if it makes it to study, essentially your bill is dead. But sometimes, we'll have a bill that gets reported out to another committee. And I think hemp is a good, kind of example for this. So
there's a bunch of hemp stuff that was happening, but there was nothing in the cannabis policy meeting that was ever discussed about hemp.
And so the committee itself, so the Joint Committee on Cannabis Policy is like all of the House members as well as all of the Senate members who are working on cannabis. And so they get to decide at the hearing the topics for those hearings. So hemp is actually going to be on the docket for, I think, May 6th. So like it'll get its day.
But is it like is it the Cannabis Policy Group, or is it a different group that's going to be talking about or listening to testimony?
So I think the reason why there's some confusion is that sometimes the bills will go to different committees, and this is what happened with hemp, is that when they get assigned out to the different committees, one hemp bill went to the Agriculture Committee, another bill went to the Cannabis Committee, and another one went to Consumer Protection. So we need to figure out who's going to actually, kind of have the hearing for hemp, and then if all the bills are going to come back and be heard together. Exactly. Sometimes they won't, and you'll have to go to multiple hearings for each of those topics. But eventually what will happen is sometimes you'll report it back out to another committee to take a peek at it, have their own hearing.
To see if there's any other things that they haven't considered yet.
Exactly.
Any unattended side effects or consequences. So when it comes to this particular round, so before we get into the specific bills, because that's going to be the chunk of what I want to talk about.
Yeah, of course.
After everything's been heard, you say it runs on like an 18-month, like a year and a half kind of situation.
Yep.
So once it gets out and maybe some of the bills get reported favorably, it goes to Ways and Means. And then at that point, does the governor have to sign something? And when does that happen? Is it end of this year? Or you said it was January. So basically it'd be like June of next year when all this gets implemented if anything was passed?
So they changed the rules up a little bit this year. So this year is very new to both the House and the Senate in terms of how they're going to handle the bills. They put some new rules in place to try to create some more transparency, kind of speed up the process, make it a little bit more efficient. So after the hearing, now all of these bills have 60 days to then get reported to the next stage. So we have until June 8th for all the bills that were heard at the Wednesday hearing to get a certain determination of where they will go. After they get that determination, so if they go to Ways and Means will then hold the bill for a while to do any work that they may need to do, and then it will go to the House floor or the Senate floor.
So June 8th, we should all mark on our calendars as a day that we should be paying attention to the news that's coming out of that.
Exactly.
State.
So you'll know kind of the next stage of like what's going to happen.
If something was kind of reported favorably or not.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. And then after that, the House and Senate will have a debate depending on if it makes it to the floor. Sometimes, there's not enough time in the session for them to cover every bill that gets to Ways and Means. So, sometimes your bill will die in Ways and Means. But I think because cannabis has become such a kind of hot button issue, it's been in the news a lot.
What's the number one agricultural crop?
Yeah, exactly. Sorry, cranberries, but kind of move out the way. Yeah,
people like weed more than cranberries. Sorry.
Yeah, exactly. And we generate more revenue than alcohol these days. So at the same time, I think they want to support our industry and make sure that we're successful. So I think this year, more than many years before this, we really have a great opportunity. And going back to what you were saying, it really is important for the whole industry to have a voice in this, whether you agree with the policy, you don't agree on the policy, like get involved and like let your local elected official know which way you're going on one of these policies, because the more that they're hearing, the more they realize like, hey, this is something that my constituents or my constituent businesses care about, and then they'll prioritize it and they'll like push it further along in the process, maybe even a little bit quicker. So again, the House and Senate will then eventually pick up the bill and they'll vote on it. And what will happen is during that process, the representatives or senators can amend the bill, add some new languages, try to strike out language, and then the final version of that will be voted on by each house. And then they'll have two versions which have been passed in each house. And then what will happen is they go to a conference committee. And a conference committee is basically, very complicated process. And I don't know why there's so many steps along the way, but it's our government. It's part of the process.
Checks and balances. Right?
Yeah, checks and balances.
You got to make sure that nobody's putting anything in there like, hey, and Goodfields gets $1,000 a month extra.
Yeah, exactly. So they have to audit it a little bit more and like check it. But after those bills have been passed, they go to what's called a conference committee. Conference committee is a select few representatives and senators that will then negotiate with each other on the final version of the bill that will go
line
to
by
the government.
line almost.
Yeah, exactly. Line by line. And usually this is where a lot of the horse trading kind of goes. It's like, okay, if you give me purchase limits, then I'll give you advertising, what I mean? Something along those lines. And so it's a select group. So 3 usually on both sides. So 3 senators, 3 representatives. They'll go through a process of consolidating their bill into one. And once they agree on something, it'll go to the governor to then have to sign. And so
and then it'll be law.
And then it'll be a law.
Okay. And then the CCC will have to implement again.
Exactly. So then the CCC, this is where they kind of take the baton and have to make any changes to their regulations if they need to.
So, and as a license holder, we kind of have to wait for those regulations to be updated before we do anything with it. We can't be like, hey, I can do all these things now because the government signed this thing. We actually have to wait for the final draft, basically, of the regulations from the CCC at that point.
Yeah.
So are we checking in, like, as the executive director at the MCC, are you checking in and getting a temperature check with different senators and representatives just to see like, hey, how's it going? Like, are you guys like looking at this favorably? Like what's, almost kind of getting like just a taste of what.
So like part of the advocacy is like meeting with the members of the committee who are going to make a decision on where those.
So that last step, that committee part, and would the chairs of the policy group be on that? So Rep. Donahue and Senator Gomez. Shout out to Senator Gomez and Rep. Donahue.
Exactly. And then they also have vice chairs. So the number 2 is Rep. Duffy out of Holyoke, and then Rep. Fernandez out of the Cape.
Okay.
Yeah, and so like you want to meet with them, give them your viewpoints on why they should support something or report it out favorably, and a lot of that, to be honest with you, and even folks who are on the cannabis committee or in the legislature, you have to kind of take it all the way back to like a cannabis 101. Well, we just had to do a kind of a civics 101. We got to do something similar.
Right. Because I know cannabis.
You know cannabis.
I don't know
so
civics.
Exactly.
They know civics.
They know civics.
They don't know cannabis.
They don't know cannabis.
Right.
Exactly. So you have to kind of educate them about the plan itself, how businesses run, our regulations, and like what that means for your business.
Why we're restricted in certain ways, and if we were to release some of these kind of overburdensome regulations or laws, then that would allow the industry to flourish.
Exactly. Exactly. So there's a lot of that part of the education process, but then also, giving them what they need, what their staff needs to make a determination. So that means, providing them with reports, providing them with the data, having them come out to your facility to like visit and see it firsthand.
I've invited Senator Gomez a few times now. I'm waiting for him to show up. I haven't invited Rep. Donahue because I didn't have his email address, but of course I could just look it up. It's a public email address.
Yes, all of the email addresses, all of the phone numbers for every legislator is up on the malegislature.gov website. So they all have access there. And if you don't know, there's also like a Find My Legislator tool.
Yeah, I was going to say that's one of the things. So basically, even though everybody gave all their testimony on that day, you can still advocate through this entire process. Okay, so you don't give up just yet. There's still more. If you don't think your voice was heard, stay on top of these people because you want to get your things passed. As an operator in this industry, there are certain things that are going to be more favorable for your business and otherwise. And I know a lot of people have really strong opinions about like license caps.
Yeah.
Before we get there, so that's Civics 101, everybody. Congratulations, you made it through.
Passed.
Everybody passes the test. If you're still listening at this point, Good Vibes is more than a product. It's your cannabis toolkit. Drop it into your drink, mix it into tea, kick up your mocktail, or just pop it in straight. You can even bake or cook with it. Our unflavored option is perfect for brownies or any recipe where you want control and precision. No more guessing how strong your edibles are. Available in 500 milligram and 1,000 milligram bottles, and flavors like strawberry, grape, blue ras, and our newest, mango guava 1,000 milligrams. Grab your toolkit at dispensaries across Massachusetts or at getgoodfeels.com. And as always, 21 plus only. Please consume responsibly. I guess just like off the top of my head, there was, I think I ran through this before the pod too. There was like 5 general kind of concepts.
Yep.
The license cap stuff, the allocation or allotments limits.
Yep.
There was badging. Registration stuff. There was advertising stuff. There was Lorna's Law, worker safety stuff. Did I miss anything?
The medical divert.
The medical divert verticalization, which we already touched upon. So there's 6 general topics that were kind of proposed there. Let's start with advertising, because I feel like that one is one of those kind of ones that every operator's just like, this is just unfair.
Yeah.
This is like, why can't we? Because I think Meg Sanders said it really, really well. And I know Emma from Cal Verde was there as well. But it was like, Meg Sanders was just like, a bundle? We have a program. We have, I can't say discount, but can I say this word instead? It is just, it's up to interpretation so much.
Yeah.
Like, how did you think that went when people were, because you were there for the entire time.
Yeah.
I had a piece out. Also, I look like a bum probably. Everybody was in suits and ties, and I'm just like, I put my hoodie on. I'm like, I stood in the background, actually. I didn't realize I was on camera.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
And so someone texted me like, hey, thanks for showing up. Thanks for being there, whatever. I look at my phone. I'm like, I don't see you anywhere. Where are you? He goes, no, you're on camera right now. And I'm like, oh, I didn't even know.
Oh, so that wasn't a strategic plan.
No, it wasn't. All of a sudden I was like, oh yeah, there I am. But anyway, so advertising. Actually, that was free advertising for Good Vibes. I was just sitting there in the camera the entire time. Well, the seats it was slim pickings for those seats.
Oh yeah,
people would get up, and then people were swarming in to grab that seat. As soon as you got up to go to the bathroom, people were like, I'm taking that seat. I saw so many people be like, that was my seat. Anyway, so advertising rules, I guess a little bit maybe about the policy. What's the change, as well as like how you think it went during that?
Yeah, so advertising is just like one of those rules where, again, we're trying to protect the kids from, seeing all this advertising that would like get them to use
Be
our
excited
products.
about it or something
Exactly,
like that. Be like, oh, I want to go to
exactly.
the dispensary, mommy.
Yeah, but even though like, the packaging requirements that we have, like we're not able to make things like with cartoon characters or like, nice colors or whatever it may be. So we're not packaging or even advertising towards kids to begin with. But, even with that, I understand the concerns from maybe some of the prohibitionists, the stigma beforehand. We're really not even asking for a lot. We're asking to really just be able to act like normal retailers. And what that means is to be able to control our inventory and then also, to get our customers to understand like when products are on sale or discounted. So what we're basically asking for in the policy is to ask for sales and discounts and customer loyalty programs to be able to be advertised behind age-gated spaces. So where you're still going to have to say you're 21 years old or older. And so that means like within your store, after you've checked your ID a couple of times, you can see, posters or advertisements or even a cross out of a number and a lower number beneath it. We're also thinking about that on your website where you've had to go on to the website and actually say, yes, I am 21 or older. I'm going to, purchase products or whatever it may be. And then also thinking about when you opt into an email marketing campaign and fill out all your information, say you're 21, and now you can get emails saying like, oh, this is actually on sale, or I can get some customer
loyalty program.
Yeah.
Because I think what the reason why I think this one's important is because a lot of it's interpretation again. So depending on your investigator, depending on who's looking at you from the CCC, like they might be like, you can't say this. You got a notice of deficiency and not NOD because you used the word discount on this one kind of like part of your website, right?
Exactly.
And now they get a notice of deficiency. They got to go to their website. They got to take down that language and say, hey, we updated the language. Here's a screenshot. It's not there anymore. And then other people are like, hey, we got 70% off today. And it's just like they don't get, nobody does it at OD because the investigator didn't see it, or maybe they just have a different interpretation of it.
Exactly.
And so I think that's a lot of the frustration from the licensed operators who are trying to play by the rules. They're like, how can, 3 miles down the street, there's this store and they're advertising nonstop all these discounts. And every time I use the word, bundle, my investigator's all over me.
Yep.
So I think it's really about leveling the playing field that comes from that stuff beyond just the, being treated like a normal retailer.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's just trying to create some consistency across the board for all businesses. It's always those who are following the rules that get the short end of the stick in this industry, unfortunately. They don't have, like you said, like compliance people who could be keeping track of this all the time. So they can't afford to pay a fine if the CCC finds them, they're deficient in this way. So I think this is just an opportunity for then us to give a safety net and like some type of like allowable sense of advertising across the board, and then that way people can capture more customers, get out the product. Exactly, a little bit more black and white.
Yeah, as opposed to so gray. And how do you think it went during the meeting?
Yeah, I think that for advertising, it's one of those ones that I think most people are behind. It's
common sense.
It's common sense kind of changes. And I think, again, we created these way back in 2017, 2018. Like we saw the kids aren't getting to these products. We're not advertising them on social media or at baseball games. But at the same time, there's hasn't been any negative impact. So why don't we give us a little bit more so that we can prove that with this new advertising change, we're also not going to have those negative impacts that you're thinking.
Yeah. And of course, we obviously want to make sure the bad actors don't get to continue to operate. We want to obviously only have good actors in the thing too. And it's like, it's the bad actors who are always trying to push that. And so it's just like, okay. And not to say they're all bad actors, but it's mostly just like, it's one of the situations where people who are playing by the rules are obviously just looking at the other people being like, I'm like losing customers now.
Yeah.
Like, it's just like, how are we getting caught up in all of this stuff that, we can't do. And all of our customers are now going to that store because we can't do what they can do.
Exactly.
All right, so that's advertising. Where do you want to go from here? Anything else specifically that you want to touch upon out of those topics? I mean, badging is something.
Yeah, badging. Yeah, I think we could probably knock out all of the ones that people
like. Because the license cap might be the last one.
Yeah. So yeah, why don't we talk about the badging? So with the badging, the agent registration cards, there is a requirement right now that for an employee who works at a company to have an employee badge for basically every location that they may enter into. So let's say you're a vertically integrated operator. You have a product manufacturing facility, a cultivation facility, as well as retail or 3 retail. You'll need a badge for every single one that you're at. And so that's hundreds of dollars per employee that you'll have to spend on badging. And it doesn't make sense when you can have one badge that can get into each of these facilities. You're also thinking about the background check costs as well as the responsible vendor training. Yeah, exactly. All of the things that you have to pay to just onboard somebody. And for some of these businesses, that's a lot of money lost because there's folks who don't show up for day one or stay for a couple of weeks and they're not able, the turnover, exactly. And you're not able to recoup any of that money back. Right. And so we're having a lot of folks who are leaving the industry because they don't want to go through that same process again. It's just becoming very onerous on all of the industry members. And so it's really trying to create some efficiency within some of the process that could be a benefit for both businesses and the employees. And so our recommendation is you create a single badge system where the employee owns the badge.
Yeah, it's on the employee.
It's on the employee.
Employer.
Exactly. The employers would still pay for the badge. So the costs aren't going to fall on the employee. But the employee can own that badge, and let's say they want to go work at another company, or let's say there's a social consumption event that will eventually open up, and they want to work that event and have some kind of side revenue. This is an opportunity for them to then take that badge and use it for value to go work at another facility or another event or whatever it may be. And right now they don't get to keep their badge when they leave because it's tied to the company itself. So I think it's just common sense to let the employees own it, as well as save companies a little bit of money on the back end.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I think that one, although we're just a single license holder, obviously everybody just has one badge here. It does make a ton of sense. Because I know, because it's funny because you had said that, but also think about if you're also medical too.
Yes.
You're having 9 badges?
9 badges.
Or something crazy. You're like, which badge am I wearing, today? I'm going to the store. Oh, I don't have that badge with me, but I can't enter the store now, even though I have my other badge with me.
Yeah. And just think about trying to badge into different doors and trying to remember which one goes to each door.
So obviously that one seems like a very straightforward, common sense one as well. So I hope to see that one change for all the people who definitely could use that. Also the cost savings. What else you want to tackle?
I'll tackle our third kind of top priority that I think we have unanimous buy-in with on the MCC side, and that's the purchase limits. So with the purchase limits currently, I think everybody understands that when you go and buy cannabis at a dispensary, you're limited to 1 ounce for your cart size. So that's 1 ounce of flour altogether, or 1 ounce or half ounce of flour, and all these other products in the equivalency. Exactly. And so we're just trying to make sure that we're competitive compared to some of the other states that have opened up around us. I think I keep mentioning that we were first to market for cannabis, but now every state around us has cannabis besides New Hampshire. And so with New York having a 3 ounce limit and Maine having a 2.5 ounce limit, there's a lot of folks who are going to these other states to buy cannabis because they can maybe just buy it all at one time instead of having to keep going back to the store multiple days per week. Right. And so we're losing a lot of our consumers in that way. And I don't think that the people from those states are coming into Massachusetts like they used to. Yeah, not like they used to. So I think this is just a common sense way for us to increase revenue streams for all our retailers, maybe tackle some of the oversupply problem that we have in terms of how much cannabis is being grown into the state. And it's just a great way for us to create some more business viability and stability.
Yeah, I think so it would raise it from 1 ounce to 2 ounce, because right now 1 ounce is the limit. Basically per day in a store. Now we're talking adult use, adult use, medical.
Exactly.
In this case, medical has its own set of rules, which we won't get into. But I actually thought it was interesting that somebody had mentioned during testimony that you can possess 2 ounces.
You can, yes.
But you can only buy 1.
Yes.
So they were like, what do you, shouldn't that match or something like that?
Exactly.
So I thought that was actually a really interesting way to look at it. But if you go from 1 ounce to 2 ounce, does that I guess, does the math still math for the edibles and concentrates, tinctures?
Yeah, so we tried to just use the same equivalency notes for like concentrates, tinctures, edibles. We're also trying to increase like how much THC you can have in a single dose of edibles as well. So just like making sure
is that
it's in the law.
So would that go from 5 milligrams to 10 milligrams? Maybe.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense.
Exactly. And then there's also another proposal by a senator who was just like, hey, let's try to match what New York is doing, and like had recommended 3. Our bill is asking for 2 at the very least, but I mean, if we get up to 3, I think that would be helpful for folks as well. So it doesn't make sense for us to keep going back to the rule if we want to, like, keep trying to compete with other states. So I would say the highest that we can potentially get would be the best.
Yeah. So, and that's something that might get settled in the conference committee or whatever. There's like, hey, all right, if we go to 3 ounces, then you can have these advertising rules or whatever.
Exactly.
Got it. Okay. This is making a lot more sense. And so those ones, I think, are very common sense ones. Those are things, the sky hasn't fallen. Let's loosen up these a little bit. Let's not be super restrictive. Let's allow businesses to operate efficiently. Ultimately, this is all about efficiencies, and generating more income and revenue that will support the industry, grow the industry, et cetera.
Exactly.
Are there any other less controversial ones? I mean,
I think we touched on medical debert a little bit earlier in the conversation. I think that one has widespread approval. I think that the only concerns that I've heard is around the licensing fees. I mean, if you've been paying $50,000 to the CCC, like maybe there's an opportunity for you to recoup some of that money back when they change the fee structure. I think also with the medical reciprocity, having more medical patients being able to access their medicine in Massachusetts.
One of the things that people don't realize is that, like, you can take your Massachusetts medical card and you can go to other states and they'll accept it.
Exactly.
But if you come to Massachusetts with like a medical card from Florida, they won't accept it here. So there's no reciprocity.
Exactly.
So that one, again, a kind of a common sense thing. It's like, well, why like turning away these medical patients, right? It's just like, it's about access, right? They are not going to give those fees back.
No, they will
They're not going to give those fees back.
Exactly.
Because I remember distinctly when I first paid my first licensing fee, I had to submit paperwork that I was a minority business enterprise at MBE through the SDO, Supplier Diversity or whatever it is. And so I was going through the paperwork for that process. I submitted all this documentation that says, yes, I am an MBE. I'm in the middle of it, but anyways, they charged me the full $10,000.
Yeah.
And then a year later, it was $5,000, and I go, oh, it's $5,000. They're like, oh, because you're an MBE. I go, I was an MBE before. Why'd you charge me 10? And they were like, oh, sorry, but you weren't actually in the SDO system at that point, so you couldn't. You still had to pay the full 10. I'm like, can you just give me the 5,000 back? They're like, nope.
Wow.
And I'm just like, ouch.
What about like credit it towards a
credit
future?
to my next, my next license fee. So, anyways, even though I do have some preferential treatment as an MBE, they still will be like, yeah, we're not giving your money back. Is what it is.
Yeah.
But the deverticalization, I think, is going to be really fun. I mean, I don't know if I'd actually participate if the allotments go up to 2 ounces. I'd be interested to see like who's going to participate in the medical side, because our products, when they go to the retailer specifically, can be converted into medical. So it's really as long as the retailers also get the medical license, then it's like they can just still buy our products but without taxes. So it's not like really on us at that point. Whereas before it was really about like making just stronger things.
Yeah.
With that said, maybe we would come up with like a 50 milligram, 100 milligram drink if we had a medical product manufacturer, because again, cancer patients, whomever, people who are suffering, like they need this medicine, we should be able to supply it for them, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Hopefully it wouldn't. I think one number that was thrown out was like $1,000 an annual license fee for people who just like add on the medical side to their adult use already. So I think that would be fair. If it's another $5,000 or another $10,000 for a non MBE or non SEE, I think that's a lot. To ask, for products that you may or may not sell that well, because again, the medical market, we're losing stores. So it's like,
losing stores, losing patients. So I think that the whole thing too is just.
I didn't renew.
Oh, really?
I didn't renew.
Yeah.
I was just like, I haven't used it in like a year because there's nothing around here.
Yeah. And I think there's other ways too, guys. I'm starting to see retailers, provide certain discounts to medical patients who have their medical card.
Because they can do discounts.
Yeah.
Yeah, medical can't do discounting.
and they can do discounts.
Yeah.
And so, it's also getting them access, like you said, to those stronger products. And most of the time, medical patients don't have a medical dispensary like within their city or town. So they either have to travel very far or use a delivery service. So
Or they're using adult use,
Or
and
they're
they're getting
adult
taxed
use.
of everything, and it's a lower potency that they need. Yeah. Very cool. So there is that one. Hit it at the top of the list. I think I got a lot of these. What else comes to mind before we get to license cap stuff?
Oh yeah, the Lorna's Law.
Okay, worker safety.
Yeah, worker safety.
Right. So Lorna unfortunately passed away 8 months. I didn't realize she had only been at the operation for 8 months before she passed away. One of the benefits of the MCC, though, is that I think one of the members of the MCC actually submitted an SOP for cannabis dust, which I thought was like, that's part of that sharing. Be like, hey, you're sharing this information. Now we have an SOP for cannabis dust, although we don't take in flower into this facility necessarily, although we're approved to now.
Exactly.
If we ever do, we have that SOP now we can look at and be like, okay, this is how we have to handle this cannabis dust.
Exactly. And so I think that's really great about the MCCs. We have all these working groups. So like we have a compliance working group, we have a cultivation working group, and those working groups will put together documents that other members can use and like have been kind of, commented on, adapted to the needs of the current industry or like a recent bulletin. And so we created this cannabis dust kind of standard operating procedure for our members to use. And I think it's been helpful because, the CCC has come in and asked for it and have reviewed it. And I think that they've been able to pass. So I think that's a good way for us to create some standardization across the industry, some things that people have to meet. And so, hopefully that'll kind of prevent any future kind of incidents like the one that Lorna had. And I didn't get a chance to before the hearing really kind of engage with Lorna's Law, but after reading on it, talking with some of our members, I think that's definitely something we're going to put on the table to support as they're developing new legislation throughout this.
Yeah, and having her mother give the testimony, I thought was really powerful. I think worker safety is paramount. Like, you can't mess with that stuff. I mean, in Massachusetts especially, that's so strong with a lot of like employee laws. It's like, why don't we have something like that? So definitely in favor of that one. It's just such a tragedy, and but again, it's like a few bad actors that just spoil everything because not spoil it, but like they just do some nefarious thing. Like, I didn't realize that they wouldn't let. I didn't follow the thing that closely because we don't really work on the cultivation side at all. So it's not something that was like top of mind for us. But I didn't realize that they wouldn't let first responders in immediately to check on her. And Lorna, at least that's the way Lorna's mother testified, which was just horrifying. It's just like there's a person like who's having a medical issue and you're not letting first responders in.
Yeah,
that's insane. And I didn't realize this, but now that things have changed, and unfortunately, I think there was a $14,000 fine that was levied against them or something trivial.
Yeah, exactly.
MSO, which is not named right now, which everybody knows who it is. Yeah. And you can look it up and Google it if you can. But basically, but one of the other things that came from it was that cannabis dust is now considered an allergen. Right. So now people are like, okay, this is something we have to take care of. You have to have the proper PPE. Right. You have to have your masks on and all this other stuff. So if you're in a trim room for 6 hours or whatever it is, like 3-hour shifts, whatever it might be, then you have to be able to supply that stuff for your staff. Like, it just makes total sense. Like, why wouldn't you do that?
Yeah, exactly.
So I don't know if it was a cost savings thing back then, and they just were like, just really trying to get people to put in maximum hours. But there's like no ventilation or something weird.
Yeah.
Which again, so one of the things that actually the CCC is really interesting with is we don't have ventilation in our facility. We do have some ventilation.
Okay.
But because the rules are so strict on windows, like looking into a facility, which is just bizarre. Because especially when we made drinks, like, what are you looking at? Water? Like, exactly. What are you expecting to see, right?
Yeah.
Because when those laws were made, it was like, oh my God, there's gonna be like plants growing in the windows, and then kids will walk by and see a plant growing in the window and be like, "Mommy, what's that?"
Exactly.
But like, so I think it's something about like 10 feet off the ground can be clear, and everything below that has to be fully opaque. And so we can't open our windows because all of our windowsills are below 10 feet.
I see.
So we have to rely on HVAC and air filters and dehumidifiers and stuff like that to be able to clean the air. And of course, we have like a little ventilation system that we can kind of just like gas off because it was for CO2 specifically.
Gotcha.
Because CO2, if CO2 you can asphyxiate, you can, die from it if you're not careful, right? And so we would always say, we have CO2 monitors on the outside and the inside of the facility where it'd be like, if you see it at a certain level, you can hit the exhaust panel and it'll just exhaust the CO2 out kind of thing, But other than that, we don't really use them, because we don't also do drinks anymore in the market.
Understood.
But it's one of those situations where it's like, well, the company, the MSO that was responsible for the death, they probably couldn't open the windows, or who knows, like, I don't know. Maybe, obviously there had to be better ventilation in general, but it is one of those situations where it's just like, some of these rules that have been put in place since 2016, 2018, or whatever these, 2022, some more updated, like, just don't make sense. It's like, I don't understand it's stigma.
Yeah, it's stigma.
The sky's falling.
Exactly. It's like a sin, like bin kind of, kind of laws. I think even with like alcohol, you can see into a liquor store.
Oh, there's advertisements everywhere.
Advertisements everywhere.
Plastered with ads about how you can get really wasted right now.
Yep.
Not exactly in those terms, of course, but it's like,
And
the ABV is on some of these things,
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that's like kind of the second and third implication of some of this stuff is like you're not able to open your windows to help with some of the ventilation. You have to invest now in like this really expensive HVAC system, and it's all based in trying to stop diversion, stop from kids like seeing it. And I think some of those are just unfounded concerns now, but we've been able to prove it, and that's why I think we're going to the legislature with all of these different changes, because it's like, okay, I think we've seen enough, and we're not seeing the things that you were fearful about, and it's time for us to now update them to make sense for these businesses to survive and operate.
I think I'm really hoping a lot of these things will change. It's so hard to compete in this market. It's so hard to just exist basically in this market because of all these rules, and especially if it's not done fairly, if it's not enforced fairly, which is a big topic I had with Executive Director Travis Ahern when he was here. I was like, how do you ensure like this equal enforcement, right? And it's training, we have the Director of Enforcement and stuff like that and all that stuff. So don't have to dive too far down that topic, but it is, equal enforcement, I think will also settle people's anxiety a lot about these things.
Exactly.
Can't look at another company and be like, why are you doing it that way? And we can't do it that way, right? So with that said, do we get to license cap stuff right now?
Sure.
Like, are we there? So
yeah, let me just sit up.
Yeah, exactly.
License caps.
let me take a sip. This is gonna be a good one. Drink break. So there were 8 bills filed.
Yes, 8 bills
regarding license caps, which again, kind of going back to our Civics 101 lesson earlier, people can attack it from the Senate, from the House. People are sponsoring different parts of this. Some of it is an agreement. Some of it is not an agreement. Like what, I think there was like 7 agreement and 1 S88 by Senator, I can't remember her last name.
Miranda.
Senator Miranda, who was against the license cap stuff, right? So I guess walk me through the lay of the land, like, so 8 in total, 7 were for it and 1 was against it.
Yes, exactly. Okay. And I think the reason why there were so many that were filed was as it was, getting kind of considered by the different legislators. I think they all had their different take about what the license cap should look like. And then there was different strategies that are sometimes employed by both the House and the Senate. So I think the Senate wanted all of the proposals from the cannabis industry in like one big bill. So there's like license cap, which is included with some of the other things like the advertising
and also the allotment stuff, like that. I noticed that in the language I'm looking at, I'm like, oh, there's cap and allotment in this one bill, right?
Exactly. So that's just like a strategy that one of the senators had, was like, just give it all to me in like one comprehensive bill, and then that way I can just like push all of these. And then on the House side, they wanted it as individual bills that they can then take and potentially put into a bigger bill a little bit later on. So that was more of just like kind of politics and differences of strategy. But the reason why I think there's some differences of opinion on what the license cap should look like is, obviously it's a contentious issue. There's some in the business environment that don't think that the bill that we had filed was aggressive enough and wanted to push it from 3 to 9 like instantly. Obviously, there's Senator Miranda's bill and other folks and other advocates in the industry who don't want to see any kind of license cap increase at all. And so been having to navigate that, because I think with the license cap, it has become very emotional and very and I understand, a lot of folks have put a lot of time, energy, investment into their businesses and want to make sure that they're successful. But I think at the MCC, while we were having this conversation, what I really noticed was it was a lot of our local Massachusetts businesses that were looking at ways for them to be able to compete with some of the larger entities. So, thinking about our Massachusetts only verticals, or, some of our single operators were like, hey, I just don't know if I can keep my doors open any longer. And I'm going to go into receivership and personal bankruptcy. And so we tried to find some type of compromise there. And so what we've compromised on with the license cap, just to kind of overview it, is doing a gradual increase of the license cap from 3 to 6 and doing it over multiple years. And then also thinking about a component where you can invest a little bit more into a business in exchange for more equity. And I'll kind of maybe explain that a little bit. So on the license cap piece, just to separate it from the joint ventures piece, the license cap currently is at 3 retail stores that a company can own.
We're primarily talking about retail stores.
Retail stores only.
Yeah. Because it's not like product manufacturing. It's like you can kind of just expand your footprint or, swap buildings or something like that.
Exactly. And so, and I don't know if anybody's trying to invest the dollars that it takes into
cultivation.
Not into cultivation. And so I think, with the oversupply issues that we're having too, people are mainly focused on, how do we get out some of this oversupply into retail locations. And so everybody's capped at 3 retail locations currently. But I guess what that has led to is that folks don't necessarily have anybody to sell their businesses to exit. And there's also not an opportunity for them to get any new kind of funding into Massachusetts. And I think part of that is because we're not able to access traditional capital like banks and loans. You're also, looking at all the states around us that have opened up for cannabis. And I think a lot of the investment dollars are going to new markets. And then I guess just with, the way that Massachusetts businesses have just performed under the kind of over-regulation that we do currently have, it's just not an attractive market for investment money to come in. And so that's what we're trying to really figure out is just, how do we bring new investment dollars into Massachusetts? And then how do we help some of these distressed businesses, many of whom are either, minority entrepreneurs, small family business entrepreneurs who are going to really lose everything that they've kind of put into it, whether it's they put their house up on a personal guarantee for their location, or they have all of their family's 401ks invested into their business. How do we help them to not lose everything? And so those are some tricky questions for everybody to kind of figure out, because there isn't a easy solution that is out there.
Yeah. So when I think about this, do you have a sense from your constituents, your MCC members that are licensed operators, what's the split approximately? 50-50 in favor or against? Is it 80-20?
Yeah. So we don't do anything that isn't at least kind of a super majority. And I think after we've been able to kind of talk this out, because I think last year, this was when the license cap conversation initially hit Massachusetts. And I think there was a lot of kind of shock at that time. And what is this? This is a kind of a MSO takeover. But I think as we were able to have more conversations amongst operators, and then they saw it as opportunities for them to, get to a reasonable level for their businesses to be viable on the retail side, people started seeing that as a new opportunity. Smaller businesses started seeing that as opportunities for them to merge businesses and then also be able to compete. And then, like I said, I have a lot of folks who are just kind of struggling right now to keep their doors open and are at the brink of closing and, trying to find a way that we can and get them an exit opportunity without them having to go into receivership. So when we started having some of those conversations, people started understanding some of the benefits of it, while also talking through some of the concerns. There's concerns that larger entities are going to be able to take up too much market share, that they're going to be able to kind of bully their way now that they have a little bit more leverage into better deals with folks. And that's totally understandable. And I think the way that we have combated that is to try to figure out ways that we can ease this in so that the market isn't shocked by just throwing in like 3 new licenses that can be acquired by one business. So a business isn't going to jump from 3 to 6 all of a sudden. Like they're going to go from 3 to 4 and then 4 to 5 and then 5 to 6. And so I think that's a nice way for us to maybe see how the market reacts to, one company having 4 stores and then being able to adapt from there. But I still understand like there's people on both sides who have varying opinions about it, and I know I'm kind of stuck in the middle where nobody's really happy with the kind of
I remember being in those early discussions like a year ago or whatever, and being like, oh, this is a hot topic. It's one of those, it was like the first time where I was like, oh, we don't all agree on something. Because before everybody was like, yes, allotment or whatever the issue was, we were like, deverticalization, of course we all want that, right? But this was like, depending on who you talk to, you had to like almost kind of like hold back a little bit, be like, hey, how do you feel about the other person? Be like, how are you feeling about these things, right? I remember being asked that a few times, like, how are you feeling about it? As a product manufacturer, I'm like, of course, I want all the stores to be open, right? Like, for me, I don't really have a horse in the race because I don't have a retail, but I also know that like the more stores, the better I'll end up doing, because we have the number one product in the market right now, right, in our category. So for us, it's just like, of course, we want more stores available and more open, because for us, also, it's about access, right? Because of course, we don't want, 35 stores in Northampton.
No,
like nobody wants that necessarily, because that's not sustainable. But like at the same time, there are pockets of, towns and cities out there that could potentially have better access. Around here, there's one store. It's like, that's it. We're in a big kind of like empty area where there's not really that many stores unless you want to travel, 20 minutes, 25 minutes. And
I guess just to touch on that, to clarify a little bit, is that the proposal that we have out there isn't to add new stores necessarily to the market so the numbers of retailers aren't going to go up. What we're trying to do is allow for a little market consolidation where, a distressed asset can then sell to another business, and then they would just have that business stay open rather than going out of business. Exactly.
And touching upon that, because I think there was also something about a moratorium on potentially external operators coming in. So if you already have a license or you're in the queue to get a license, you can be part of the 4, 5, and 6 over the next couple of years. But if you're not, then you don't really get access to that additional kind of stuff. Which I thought was interesting as well, because it's really favoring people who are already here, who have already put the time and effort and investment into this state. But I have noticed a few times now, I have a good friend who, unfortunately, I think is going into receivership right now. And I don't know if that would have helped for them, but maybe it would have. But I do happen to see, like, I hear of stores sometimes be like, hey, we own this store. Now we own this store. And one store that I know of has like 5 stores. Or one so it's like 4 or 5 or something like that. Like, how did they get around those things? And of course, you probably don't know those details. But
but there's been news stories about it, and I think that's like another thing where this may be able to kind of level the playing field by making it a little bit more black and white, is because like there has been reports out there of like finding little loopholes. Like, let's say like me as an individual owns these 3 stores, you as like my partner or whatever it may be, maybe put it under your name, and like there's like another way.
And then if it's like under 10%, it's like 9.9% I own, and then I also own 9.9% of like 7 other stores or something like that. Right? You don't have to report. So there are these interesting kind of loopholes, and loopholes are such an interesting word to use. So I don't love using that word because I'm also a hemp operator. So loopholes is a touchy subject. So, but we're talking about cannabis today. But like the idea of being able to, work within the rules you've been given to be able to kind of exploit those things to ultimately kind of, tip the scales in your favor a little bit. Whereas if you were to put something like this in place, whatever, I'm not sure which bill that was behind MCC specifically, but if you were to put something like that in place, at least it levels the playing field and gives like a structure to kind of do that, and also increase investment. One of the things that I actually was really interested about was when Peyton and Tito got up and to our part of the MCC.
Yep.
And it was interesting to hear them talk about exit a lot. Because I was like, wait a second. Oh, I didn't realize that was even an issue potentially. And when they said that, I was like, that makes a ton of sense.
Yeah.
Of course, you've already done so much investment and work and effort to kind of launch this thing. And there's a bunch of stores that would love to probably buy those stores, but they have no exit strategy. There's no way for them to actually execute on something like that. So I found that was very interesting. And one of the things that Peyton said was really interesting, which was she had said that you need to be listening to the existing license holders who are here and doing the work.
Yep.
And then shortly after that, when S88 by Senator
Miranda.
Yeah. I'm forgetting all that. I apologize, Senator. Was saying these things, and then a couple of people who were provisionally licensed who weren't in the had spoken up in favor of S88 and not doing the license cap increase. But I kind of side with Peyton on this one because it is like they're living it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and then they're having to deal with all of the harsh realities that of like having payroll, having these investors that are coming at you all the time, and now having to compete with all of the business around you who are like undercutting you and having the race to the bottom.
I've had those discussions with a bunch of people who are saying like, hey, you should cut us the same deal you're cutting them. I'm like, I'm not cutting them a deal. They're literally just swallowing up margin. They're just taking it on themselves. Like, I'm so sorry. Like, I don't cut deals for people individually.
Exactly.
This is the same rate for everybody, same fee.
Exactly.
Same product price.
Yeah. So with that harsh reality, I think it's just like her frustration with this whole conversation, and it's totally understandable because she lives it every single day. And so I think that's why we're trying to help people like Peyton. Peyton is the exact example of like a family-owned local business that has put in all of this effort, kind of overcome the odds, like competing with other MSOs in her city of Springfield to open up. And just given the market dynamics right now, she's like, on that brink of like trying to figure out what to do next, but she doesn't have that exit opportunity. And we'd love to even get your perspective on it as somebody who's like, been able to have a few successful exits. Like, what would you even like see as a solution for folks, because who's going to want to buy another cannabis business? It's going to be another big cannabis business.
Yeah, from my perspective, external capital has dried up. Yeah, and I think there's some attorneys who work with investors who spoke up also during as testimony, and basically said there's no external investment. I can concur. You can of course get friends and family to invest. Yeah, if you're if you happen to be in that situation, that you have friends and family can put in $10,000, $25,000 into your business, but but external investment has moved on to other states at this point. Yeah. Massachusetts was hot in like 2019, 2020, 2021, maybe even leading, maybe tapering off in 2022 a little bit. And 2023 was a disaster for investment into this state specifically. And so I'm a huge favor of like finding, whether it's regulatory, legislature or whatever, rules that we can put in place that will spur up more investment, because it's a large enough industry, $1.6 billion annual, that I still see plenty of room for growth here. Yeah. Because the way I look at it is, of the 21 plus adults in Massachusetts, there's so much stigma still in this state that people just aren't walking into the stores that easily, right? And so that's one of the reasons why delivery was a huge thing. It was just like, hey, people are going to stop now get delivered to their home. Exactly. Hasn't really borne out that way, because I know the delivery operators are trying to figure out how to advertise to get people to know that they even exist. But assuming some of the advertising rules get updated, I can imagine a lot of delivery operators are going to be swimming in cash, because you'll be like, yeah, now I can actually reach the people I need to reach. Exactly. Right? So I still feel like the market has a lot more further way to go as far as growth. And so that's why we're investing here. For us, it's like we're doubling down. We're actually trying to do our best to kind of introduce new products, new formats, new flavors, new whatever, because we're just trying to find these little pockets of growth.
Yeah.
And to be able to say, like, there's more here. And you just have to, and we're obviously for the long term. So, I've always started with a 10-year plan. I'm probably onto my 20-year plan at this point to try to figure out, because this might be my last business. I might retire with this one, right? So for me, it's really more about trying to meet people where they are, right? And so that's why we create the products that we have, right? And I've heard from so many people. I heard from somebody literally just yesterday who said, thank you so much for having this product, because I had pneumonia last year and my doctor was like, you just got to stop smoking. You know what I mean? Exactly. And so we provide the people that option, right? So from our perspective as a product manufacturer and as a brand, we think there's a really large upside specifically for our products. Now, will all cultivators feel the same way? I don't know. But you have to have a brand. You have to have like something behind it. You can't just be like, hey, we just have the cheapest flower. And that's also how retailers have been. The price compression is because of retailers ultimately at the end of the day, like, because a lot of the retailers, I mean, of course, there's some product manufacturers who are undercutting, of course. But we recently raised prices, which is kind of unheard of, but that's because tariffs. Distillate prices are going up again. So we're getting like, $4.50, $5 a gram and stuff like that. And so our costs were in 2023 into 2024 were as low as like $2.50 a gram. I think at one point we were getting, and we were like, okay, great. We've got margin in this. We can operate even at a small scale when the machines are not running all the time. We're able to still make a little bit of profit to be able to afford, payroll very easily and all this other stuff, and get ahead of our bills, because we were struggling under debt also, because we were like, let's go find all the loan providers, right? And that's one of the things that was brought up during that by the attorneys. They were like, you get these predatory loans. I get texts still to this day being like, hey, we got $250,000. Do you want it? And I'm like, this is just some loan dude who's going to charge me like 30% or more, you know what I mean, on that loan. Like, no, I don't want the loan, because I don't want to spend the majority of the money is going into interest, you know what I mean? So you get these predatory lenders out there who are just going after these social equity, economic empowerment people who are just like, hey, you need money. I got $200,000 for you right now. Just sign this agreement. And all of a sudden you're on the hook for like, $15,000 a month for the rest of your life. You know what I mean? It's like, it's going to be really hard to get ahead of those payments if you're getting charged 30%, plus APR, which at that case would be usury, but there's ways around it. But yeah, I do see a long-term play specifically for our product and our product format. But at the same time, I think if you are able to stay long-term, you're good. And so I think a lot of people who are going to be trading their stores out for better locations or whatever, because there's a lot of people who I contact with me, because I'm pretty well networked, especially with the retailers as well, that they'll come to me and be like, hey, I'm selling my store. Do you know anybody? Right. And they'll ask me, because I happen to know people who are like looking to buy stores right now too. So from my perspective, there's a lot of people out there who are looking to get into the market still, or who already have 2, maybe 3 stores, that this would definitely open up that for them, because they're running a business in a way that they're able to make that margin and they can cash flow it in order to continue to invest and reinvest into the market, right? But they don't have places to put that sometimes. If they're capped at 3, where do they go from there?
Exactly. And I think that's like a big thing. Like, you have had to determine like, okay, what is our long-term plan for Massachusetts? And I think people have gotten to kind of the end of that plan because they're capped right now. And so they're now having to look at other markets to be able to expand. And us as Massachusetts, if we want our brands to be able to be successful, why wouldn't we want them to grow within Massachusetts and be able to, be sustainable, make a name for itself, and then be able to expand? Because I think that, it still takes a long time to like make your supply chain as efficient as possible and cut down on your costs. And, going to another state to like continue your growth seems like a little bit backwards when, there's still a lot of work and opportunity here in Massachusetts. So I definitely agree with you on that front. And I think along the funding piece and thinking about the capital, we have the Social Equity Trust Fund that has come out. I think that is a great tool for a lot of small businesses. It's
scary to, though, but like, there's a third party. It's not the CCC. It's a third party who reviews the applications and actually. So that's scary to me, because I know a couple of social equity people who didn't get anything.
Exactly. And that's the whole thing too, is like, we can't look at the Social Equity Trust Fund as like the solve everything for a lot of these smaller businesses. Because like you said, some of them did not get it. And I heard
a handful of people did not get anything. And I felt awful for those people.
And especially when I found out like what they were trying to use that money for, like just to like, stabilize their building or whatever it may be. And so, that is heartbreaking. And so we can't just depend on that as the only source of capital for people. And I think that if we're able to, pair that with maybe some additional investment from a larger company, I think we may be able to see a lot more people, get past that provisional license stage and open up, or allow you to have more of a stable business where you can now think about scaling up your operations. And so, I think it's just a tool in the toolbox. And I think for the license cap itself, like, I know there's a lot of debate around the policy, but, there's things that we can do if there are concerns around like, monopoly or like the way that it may be abused. And I think, the S88 bill that you said from Senator Miranda, pushed by Massillon, like that's interesting. After like kind of hearing some of the debate around like auditing the kind of ownership structures the transparency and like maybe there's a way for us to create some accountability in addition to having an ease of the license cap where like we can see some of the benefits of new investment while making sure that we're keeping the companies accountable and not letting them find these little loopholes, even though we're not going to use that word loopholes per se.
And so when I think about some more of that testimony, the CPA, I don't remember her name. Tracy got up and she actually was talking about some numbers around what would be a monopoly in the situation, right?
Yep.
And she said something like 10 to 12 maybe would be started and consider like, because if you brought the largest 10 to 20 MSOs in and they could all get 12 licenses, then that starts to become almost monopolistic of just a few operators owning everything. But at 6 or even 9, it's like there's still like, I think she put out the number like it'd be 7.5% they would own out of the 400 stores.
Exactly.
So I think that seems unfounded that that's a monopoly at that point. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I don't think that we can necessarily just, I guess, do the math of like the number of stores. I understand like they have bigger operations. They can like
of course. It's not just a raw number.
It is not just a raw number
because
piece,
people are trading shelf space and stuff like that. I've heard that story, which I was like, that's an interesting tactic. I never thought about that. You could basically say like, hey, we'll fund your operation or we'll give it to you and on consignment. Just pay us when you get paid. And as long as you keep on giving us prominent shelf space in your store, you're basically investing or funding this store in a sense.
Yeah, exactly. But it also gets some of these folks who have been stuck in the provisional stage for a long time, potentially the opportunity to get in and like actually start their operation, build their brand. And I think that's something for us to have a hard conversation about of like, do you want to, maybe, yes, you have to give up a little bit of your own like equity to be able to get it, but is that equity worth not having a business at all? And so I think that's something for us to consider. And I do think, if we put some specific protections around it, we do it in a way that we kind of phase it in, I think we can address some of those concerns. And going back to Tracy's point, like she did the report and modeling where you need at least 5 stores to be able to cover all of your costs, like including like compliance, operating costs and everything like that, and become kind of net positive. And so if you're thinking about it that way, I think that the goal should be to scale up to 5 stores for people. And I guess it's just the way that we do that is kind of getting debated right now.
Yeah, I mean, she CPA, she does financial modeling, and so she's going to know the numbers, right?
Exactly.
And she also has a lot of customers, clients in the as operators. One of the things that I actually was looking up before this interview was the amount of provisional licenses retailers, and it's over 500 provisional licenses right now. And I don't know how many have been abandoned at this point. Just wasting away in the queue kind of thing, you know what I mean? Because I definitely felt that took us 18 months to get from start to finish or start to starting line.
Start to starting line.
Before we made a single dollar, it took us 18 months and $700,000 or something ridiculous we had to put into this just to get it to the starting line to make a single dollar, which is a crazy amount of money if you think about it for people who are like, making $50,000 a year at their day-to-day. Like, imagine you had to put up all that cash just to get started. I know there's people who have done it cheaper, and there's also people who have spent way too much.
Exactly.
But at the end of the day, we're not trying to necessarily create the, like, not to pick on states, but Florida. You can think of, like, I guess Trulieve would be the big example.
Exactly.
It has 300 stores or something like that. That's not what we're trying to say here.
No.
Right? So if you could maybe, so we've already kind of covered some of those things to like unfounded kind of monopolistic things and stuff like that. If you were to speak to maybe that person in the provisional license stage right now, maybe their social equity or whatever, how would you kind of ease them into the conversation a little bit? Like what those conversations look like when you're typically talking to these people?
Yeah, I think, it's one, kind of understanding what their goals are, like with their business. And then like from there, seeing if they have kind of what they need to get to that starting line. And I think I've tried to give them examples from other states where like, the MSO kind of partnership or like, the investment opportunities you may get from a larger company who's looking to get into Massachusetts through one of these equity joint ventures or being able to, help out in increasing their total footprint with the license cap increase is like, sometimes like, those can be beneficial to you as a brand if you kind of structure your deal in the right way. And I think that I've seen many opportunities that people have had in places like New Jersey and like New York and like where they've actually come out with their products, have been able to take those products and expand them across the state. And then from there, they were able to leave out of that partnership and then be able to go to other states and like expand their brand and footprint even more. So I think, we got to stop thinking about it as such like a dirty kind of partnership. And I think that if you structure it in the right way, there is really good opportunity for you. And so I think that is like probably the number one pitch that I've given to people. And I guess to address some of their concerns with Massachusetts, I think that why don't we work on guardrails around this policy rather than like thinking about it as not a good policy overall, because obviously we have a problem of no new investment, no exit opportunities. And so are we just going to say, sorry, like, we're going to keep this as it is, this closed shop. And then like, and so we're going to be in a situation where if we don't get some of these provisional license holders open and some of our black and brown operators, small businesses close, like it's going to have the same kind of intended effect that we're trying to prevent with the opposition to the license cap. So I think it kind of cuts both ways on this.
That's it's an interesting perspective, because I think a lot of people who again, I hope if you're a social equity economic empowerment applicant in the provisional license stage right now, you should listen to this conversation in total right now, because it is important that you listen to what's actually happening in the industry right now and not just the green rush of the old days and being like, hey, we're just going to make a ton of money when we open. That ship has sailed years ago at this point. So you have to get down with the realities of what's actually happening in this industry and listen to the people who are here, listen to the operators who are actually living it, and then talk to them. Actually, I would say listen and have those conversations with those people, because they'll tell you how it really is before you actually come here, and whether or not it makes sense for you to continue, whether you're partnering with a VC or not VC, but investor, we'll say, or not. Hopefully, you can educate yourself to see if that's, right for you and your family. But any last parting thoughts? We've been going at it for like an hour and a half almost now. I'm not sure you realize that.
No, I didn't even realize. I just got kind of caught up in the conversation.
No I got shit to do, sorry.
No, you're all good. Me too.
So, any last parting thoughts? Any want to shout outs to MCC?
I think, just a shout out to the MCC for like showing up to the hearing. And then, I think shout out to all the other advocacy organizations that have been working this too. I think we're having a lot of great energy within the industry right now. And even though we're not always agreeing on like the solutions, I think we're coming together and having some real debate about the merits of both sides of it and giving the legislature, the pressure that they need to be able to solve some of these things.
Perfect. I love it. Well, thank you so much, Ryan, for coming on.
Most definitely. Thank you.